Our next speaker is David Liu talking about interlinear prompting. There you go. You are sharing. You are good to go. Take it away, David.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. If anything happens during the call at the meeting, just put it in the chat and I'll be sure to see it. My name is David Liu, and I'm a student at Sylvania Southview High School, and I worked with Professor Micha Elsner at The Ohio State University, and our research examined a word-by-word approach for prompting for interlinear glossing for low-resource languages. So interlinear glossing, if you're not familiar with it, at least I wasn't when I started this project. It's a form of documentation that, by means of grammatical labels and morpheme segmentation. So basically, you take a sentence from a language and you sort of segment it into either words or characters. In our case, it was words, and you cut it up into these segments and translate them individually to get a better understanding using these grammatical labels to differentiate these translations, to basically see the whole sentence one word at a time and understand each translation and how it plays a part in the context of the language. So the example I've pulled here is from the language of says, which is part of the SIGMORPHON challenge task. And as you can see here, each individual word is separated between the sentence, and not only is it translated, but it shows a grammatical label that you can use to understand and sort of see parts by parts for each of these words. So this method of documentation has been extremely beneficial for computational linguistic progress. It's used in cases for language revitalization and documentation projects. And due to sequential prediction models, which allows models to basically learn from patterns that they've previously seen in the data and infer based on these previous examples, much like how our brains are designed to think, we've seen a lot of good progress from this as well. So there's multiple reasons why this is the case, why this form of documentation is commonly used for these revitalization and documentation projects. Firstly, it allows for an easier and more simplified sort of representation of the language and its translations. It's very easy to see when you have each word kind of placed and split up so you can see all the parts of the sentence. And through the usage of prompting, the linguist or the researcher, they can actually give these instructions for the glossing. They can give these language instructions in the model, and as a result, it can learn from it and use it accordingly. And in a language like says, simpler prediction approaches don't typically use information from the free translation appropriately. So they'll sometimes pick the wrong translation, or they'll get confused or label it because it's context dependent. So large language models have a good model of what that translation typically means and what it serves to do because they're better at making these contextual decisions. So in our case, we decided to utilize retrieval-based glossing, where in our case, the model was GPT-4. We would provide GPT-4 with the word we would want translated, the language that it originates from, as well as like brief instructions and a formatting page. In this case, the formatting that we asked the LLM to gloss in was the Leipzig format. So we developed, firstly, a program in Python that would search the training database from the SIGMORPHON task for any words that exactly matched the target word or any words that were approximate matches. So essentially, it just searched and filtered through all of the possible matches, first starting with exact. So if there was a word that was exactly the same as the target word, then the program would pull that sentence or that word from the training database and give it to GPT-4. If there wasn't an exact match, they would use approximate matches where they're ranked by k-best outputs for searching for words with the longest common substring. So essentially words that are similar enough to the target word, but might not be the exact word. Those, as long as characters were the longest substring between the two, they would be pulled and also given to GPT-4 as well. So in this way, we're able to give GPT-4 examples of how the target word or any word that closely resembled it through that longest common substring approximate match test actually how it works in the context of the language. So we give it that alongside the target word and the language it's given, and we ask it to basically gloss it. So for cost and time reasons, we chose to only experiment with GPT-4, but definitely in the future, a avenue of research could be exploring other different models. In the end, our base raw model outperforms SIGMORPHON's baseline in general, but unfortunately loses in cases like Arapaho in both the retrieval and the challenge winner. We looked at how our word-based prompting system, because we split it up into individual words, and we saw how that compared, and we found that it was efficient and does perform similarly to the actual sentence-based methods, especially on shorter inputs. Lastly, the LLM is able to use the context of the sentence and the language because of the data to differentiate between different tags, grammatical tags, when they're trying to make these glosses, which does improve the accuracy. However, there are still some issues down the line with the language of says, which I'll explain down the line. But as for the just simple raw model, we did see some promising results, but ultimately we also wanted to see how far this model could go using a three best Oracle system. In our original program, we had GPT-4 generate three possible glosses per word that we gave it. So ranking them one, two, and three. We simply had GPT-4 pick number one. However, using a system that's based on Jacquard similarity, we wanted to like simulate a human annotator or a human linguist through this Oracle system by picking the best match instead of just the first one. Essentially, we knew that our system would perform better. It would be enhanced if there was a sort of function of oversight. That's what the three best Oracle system provides for GPT-4. We found that this Oracle system outperforms the challenge winner in more than half of the languages at the word level. However, morpheme levels, the gains were a little bit smaller because, especially in complex languages, we were limited in the morphological analysis. But overall, having that ability of oversight and having the ability for that Oracle system to pick the best word instead of the first gloss that GPT-4 generated showed even better results, and it was very promising. So we also discovered another sort of intersection of possible research, which is in the language of says. Since the costs of running GPT-4 were a little bit out of our reach, we couldn't really focus on every single language in the SIGMORPHON test. We only predominantly focused on the language of says. And one of the difficulties that came out of this project when we were looking at says was the appearance of morphological syncretism, or like in the usage of converbs. Essentially, there's two different morphological functions, but they're both expressed with one form. So the LLM, in this case, GPT-4, would get confused in certain cases. They would think that one case was, they would apply one label that could have been applied for two different glosses. So this was something that we saw commonly. In fact, there was around 405 test set errors involved using this converb tag, because the biggest confusion in our case was between the past unwitnessed tag and the perfective converb tag. So GPT-4 often got confused on whether or not which tag to use because it was used by the same actual word. So it would often fail and make these mistakes when we actually tested it. So the problem is that a converb is a sort of verbal form used to introduce subclauses or adverbials, and particularly in says, they're used for different sequences of events. So basically, we knew that GPT-4 was struggling to find or differentiate between these syncretism, and we wanted to see how we could sort of tackle this problem. We sort of delved into a sort of case study on the language of says into our paper as well. You can check that out. But overall, there are three main steps in the sequence as illustrated by the diagram. We create a data set of minimal pairs, like you would see in any homework problem. We would ask the LLM to solve this problem and tell us how to differentiate between the two tags. And then we'd add the LLM written instructions into the prompt during the inference period. then ask the large language model to actually reason step by step about which tag to pick. Essentially, we were sort of walking the LLM through, these are the tags you should be looking out for and why these might not be the case, and then asking it to follow its own instructions. So we were able to actually reduce the errors by 11% for the perfected convert tag. And while it's not a great success, it is significant because it's hard to get any LLM to actually follow these explicit linguistic instructions because it's not what it's like trained to do. It's more open based. So we thought that
2 minutes, David.
while it wasn't a great success, it was significant. And these are just some examples of the generated guidelines given to GPT-4, which had varying levels of success. It's correct about the first two guidelines because it uses the words main verbs in its instructions, but there were other errors resulting from misidentifying the main verb. So to conclude, using the LLM alone as a glossing model, we can't beat a sequence model, but it seems that it's better to follow some other recent projects by combining the two together. The oracle methods are what would happen if we did have a human linguist sort of checking the process to pick the best word, and that simulated the performance, showing very promising results. And while LLMs don't follow these glossing instructions, typically GPT sort of does. So it seems that we might have found one situation where it could be possible, and there is some bias remaining in the meta language, for instance, in misidentifying main verbs and clausal structures. But basing analysis on the free translation, the structure doesn't often match with the gloss. But overall, it shows us great promise for this sort of technique of interlinear glossing, especially with that oracle method. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, David. I neglected to mention before that David is in fact a high school student. So this is extra cool work. Thanks for that. I think I've got some questions in the room here. All right, coming over. Zachary, go ahead.
Hey, yeah, thank you for the really cool presentation. I've tried to beat the Gearbox scores there before and have never managed, so nice work. I was curious because we spent a lot of time when you're doing this task trying to look at how to tokenize the output of the automatic and interlinear glossing model. And so I guess here it was just the GPT tokenizer. Did you take a look at what that looked like after you put the output through the GPT tokenizer?
We did look at it a little bit. We just mainly focused on having GPT-4 sort of gloss each independent word, and then we managed to run the tokenizer into it. But I think we did touch on it a little bit, but it wasn't a main focus. So I'm not exactly too familiar with it either. So yeah.
All right, another question in the room.
Well, thank you. This is really interesting work. I was interested in the confusion of the tags with the isomorphism, the same morpheme with different tags. Did I understand correctly that you fed it in word by word and sentence by sentence, or was it only one of those?
Yeah, we fed it word by word. We would first split each sentence into the words, and then we would create individual prompts for the word using the exact and approximate matches. And then if the confusions did occur, we would basically give it examples of how the tags operate and how they're different, and then feed those instructions back into GPT-4 and have it basically talk us through its mindset to make sure that it wasn't making the same mistakes.
Okay, thank you. But yeah, I saw Micha ask. This is Sarah Muller asking this question. So I was just curious because in the pre-LLM models, it's always difficult with the low resource languages to give it, try to give it context and just got more confused. So I was wondering if you noticed a difference between feeding it the whole sentence context versus giving it word by word. That's my first question. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. As for the context of the actual target word or the confusion tags, I think that is a good point that the sentences could definitely add more to the context. We did have the approximate and the exact matches, which both were they actually gave the sentence where the word either exact or approximate matched was located in. So even though that was there, I could understand why there might not be the same amount of context as just giving it the sentence or that sort. So I think a little bit of it was there, but definitely something in the future we could look at.
Awesome, great, thanks very much. the dreaded less of a question and more of a comment. The machine-assisted annotation is rampant in industry where I work. So I love. I think this is exactly the right kind of usage for this sort of thing. I think that's a great way to, I guess, scale up human output, for lack of a better word. Talking into two microphones. All right, let's